You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a terrific day. Thanks for taking me along. It's good to be with you. At the time that I'm recording this, I just wrapped up reading a book called 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And it was one of those books that just came along at the right time with exactly what I needed to hear or see, exactly when I needed to hear or see it. I wonder if you can relate to that. I'm betting that you probably can. And if you can, I'd love to hear from you. You can always comment on the blog post that goes with these episodes, or when you see them on YouTube or SoundCloud or wherever you'd like. Because every now and then, there are little parts of our journey where we pick things up that just resonates with us. And it's funny how you can see something or read something or maybe even pick something up from someone in a conversation. You know, like an example might be where a friend or a relative will suggest something to you, and it's kind of the old you can lead a horse to water thing. You hear them, and you appreciate it, but for whatever reason, whatever they're suggesting or whatever you're reading or you've picked up upon just isn't resonating at that same energy level or frequency that you're at that point. But then maybe a week later, years later, all of a sudden, you pick that up, and it's like a light bulb goes off, and then sometimes you go back to that person and you say, oh, you know, I just read this book, or I finally took up this activity, and they just kind of smile at you because they knew all that time ago that it would be the right thing. That's kind of how I felt about this book, 10% Happier, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in just a second. But because of that, I thought, you know, every now and then people will suggest something like that to me that's exactly what I need to hear when I need to hear it. Or I'll take suggestions from other people, and then I'll go and investigate them in my own time and find them to be really helpful to me. In fact, the book 10% Happier was a book that was on my list that I keep in my phone, just a list of books or things that when I come across them, I'll just make a note of them so that when I'm in a library or something like that, I'll go and I'll open up that list and see what's there. And it was on that list, and I can't remember how it got there. I heard it from someone, maybe picked it up in another podcast, something, I don't know. Anyway, it was there. I'm glad it was. And so I thought I'll take this podcast to do a little version of my own in an effort to try to help you or somebody else, or maybe somewhere down the line someone will listen to this podcast or find the show notes blog post that goes with it and find something out of one of the books that I've mentioned, and it'll help them. Or you'll come to me and you'll make a suggestion, and I guess this sounds selfish, but maybe you can tell me about a book that I haven't heard of yet, and I'll go pick it up and have another aha moment. But that's what it's all about, I really think, is trying to help each other out and share experiences and then get on that same wavelength, hopefully a positive one, so that we can help each other out. So 10% Happier, it was really interesting to me because it talked about a path toward mindfulness and meditation in particular. But it was told from the perspective of the author Dan Harris, who works in TV broadcast news, specifically for ABC, which really isn't anything that interests me very much. But I was intrigued at the fact that he's in a business that is really ego-driven, fast-paced, cutthroat, you might even say. And so I really appreciated the way that he wrote the book about, well, kind of approaching it from the standpoint that he had always been very driven to succeed, and it was important to him to work hard and to compare himself with others and to challenge himself to do better, but then describes the journey that eventually led him to having a panic attack live on the air in front of millions of people, and then piece by piece sort of awkwardly addressing the journey that led him into mindfulness and meditation, and some of the hesitations that went with that, some of the skepticisms, and some of the change in attitude that he might initially have had about a process or about certain people, and what came out of it. I found it incredibly relatable, and I felt strongly enough about it that I've added it to my new page on my website, Kevin's virtual bookshelf. So you can go and find out more about it there. noscheduleman.com/books. But that's what kind of got me going on this, was 10% Happier by Dan Harris. If you're at all interested in meditation and mindfulness, but you, like me and like Dan Harris, have had some hesitations of thinking that, boy, if I get a little bit more zen, am I going to lose my edge? What I found, and what Harris says a lot more eloquently than I ever have, probably ever will, is no, you not only do you not lose your edge, you actually get more focused and you'll get more productive and get more done once you start to explore mindfulness. At least that's been his experience. And as much as I consider myself very much a beginner as far as all that's concerned, I can relate to that and support that and suggest that I think that's true, and I've already seen that developing in my own life. So 10% Happier, that's one suggestion. Now, as for the rest of the podcast, I'm going to give you 5 books that have really positively changed and influenced my life, plus one bonus, and one that I can't say yet has changed my life, but I'm hoping that it will, and that I'm applying to life on a day-to-day basis. So here we go. The first one I'm going to talk about, and I've got them all on a chair here right beside me, so if I go off mic for just a second, that's what I'm doing, is I'm grabbing the book. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a book called Conscious Living by Gay Hendricks. And when I went to compile some notes for this podcast and get the books out, I really became aware of just how much of an influence Gay Hendricks has been to me over the course of my journey, and especially over the last 5 to 10 years. There are a lot of works by Gay Hendricks that have just really resonated with me and been a profound help. So I hope I get to meet him someday so that I can thank him personally. But I'm going to talk about conscious living for just a couple of moments. Now, I've written about this on my blog before, about conscious living and what it meant to me. My copy of the book, which I'm holding in my hands now, is all beat up and creased, and I'm a little embarrassed about that, but it also makes me smile. The short version of the story of why conscious living, which is subtitled Finding Joy in the Real World, the short version of why my copy of this book is all creased and beat up is that I bought this book and I had read part of it, but I didn't get all the way through it. It's an example of what I was talking about a few minutes ago, where I liked it, but I just wasn't resonating with it at a very deep level. So I shelved it. I didn't get rid of it, but I put it on a shelf somewhere and largely kind of forgot about it. Then in late 2010, I still remember exactly when it was. It was late on a Friday evening, and it was the time when I was confronted with the information that my wife of the time was engaged in an affair with somebody else. And I was so overcome with shock, anger, I guess, embarrassment, shame. I mean, all of these swelled up inside me so quickly, I just didn't even know what to do. And so I went down in the basement and I removed myself from everybody in the house. And I just grabbed something off a shelf and I started throwing it to the ground. I remember being so upset and in such deep despair. Like I was just kind of swirling around in this tornadic sort of twilight zone. And I remember smacking whatever I had in my hands off the corner of the washer and dryer. I'm not saying I'm proud of this. I'm not saying behave like this. This is just, it's a true story of what I did. I didn't hurt anyone, myself or anybody else, but I didn't even know how to begin to cope with those emotions that I was dealing with at that time. I couldn't believe that what was happening was happening. And after I kind of acted out to the point of exhaustion, and when I finally stopped, and then I looked down at the ground at what the object was that I had been slamming around, and I saw the cover of Conscious Living by Gay Hendricks staring back up at me. I'll never forget this moment. I immediately felt horrible, not just because of the circumstances of what was going on, but when I looked down at the book and I saw that it was all beat up and creased and cracked, I was pretty ashamed of my behavior. But I remember looking down at the book. I didn't even remember picking it up off the shelf. But I looked down at it, and I picked it up, And then I went around the corner out of that sort of laundry/utility room and then into a room that I used as a home office at the time. And I sat down behind the desk at that office and I just opened up Conscious Living, which I'd never finished before, to a random page. And here's what that page said. It's on page 85 of the book. Gay Hendricks says, 20,000 therapy sessions during the past 30 years have taught me something I now believe in my bones. We choose how gently we get our lessons by how open we are to learning. Life teaches us with a sledgehammer if we refuse to pay attention. It administers the same lesson with a feather tickle if we show a willingness to learn. Now that's become one of, dozens of passages in this book that have been highlighted and dog-eared and flagged over the years. I remember at that moment remaining behind the desk in my home office and picking Conscious Living back up and beginning to read it again. And it just started to open my mind up to something that I wasn't ready for before then. I realized from that passage that I just shared with you, I had been getting messages by way of a sledgehammer, and I wasn't getting the messages, so I kept getting sledgehammered. But I read Gay Hendricks' story, and I started thinking about personas, which he talks about, and taking responsibility for my experience. And there's just self-esteem and so many other just incredible things in this book that I can't say enough about. But that's one of them, and it's number one on this list. It probably would be number one anyway, but it's the top on the list for today because it's I'm doing them alphabetically, which is why number two is also going to be by Gay Hendricks. So there's number one, Conscious Living. Number two, also a book by Gay Hendricks, as I just mentioned. I got to organize this better next time. This book is called 5 Wishes. Now, there's a reason why this one's on the list, and it's a pretty simple scenario that I've talked about before in various forms in this podcast and in some blogs that I've done as well, where in the book 5 Wishes by Gay Hendricks, he describes a situation where he is speaking with somebody else who tells Gay that he had at one time almost died, basically been on his deathbed, which gave him the opportunity to be able to reflect back on his life and ask himself whether it was a success or not. And then he recovered and ended up going on living and kind of having, however you would like to portray that, a second chance at life, I guess. But that's a really profound question if you think about it. Imagine yourself at the end of your days and look back on your life. Now ask yourself honestly, was it a success or was it not? Are you happy with it or are you not? Will you have regrets if you stay on the same trajectory that you're on now, or are you good if you just kind of continue the way things are now and you end up 5 minutes, 5 years, 5 decades from now on that same path? I sat with that thought and it really kind of shook me to my core. I first read 5 Wishes a short time after the separation from the situation that I just described a few moments ago. So this would have been back in 2011. So 5 years ago, a little bit more than that from the time that I'm recording this. And I've got in my hands now, I've got some handwritten notes of some of the reasons why, at least measured at that time, I felt like if I was looking back on my life and if that was the end, that I would have to say there were certainly successful things about it. You know, the top of that list would include, of course, my 2 boys. But there were some other things that I really felt some despair about that I thought if this is it, and if I were to go out today, there are going to be some things that I'm left with that I don't think I did. And that was the process, or that was the thought process that really started some change for me. It didn't happen right away, but it at least got me kind of into that mindset. And it wasn't a negative place. It was, in terms of regret there, it turned me, or started to turn me, from feeling like I was a complete failure off the face of divorce. And this was also a short time after a business that I had helped build. Basically, it didn't completely go away, but we downsized it to the point where I wasn't involved anymore, and it felt like a failure. So all of that had happened at the same time, and I really felt like I had run out of time. I was only in my late 30s at that point, but I felt as if I'd blown it. Like I had my chance at life and I'd messed it up. And going through this exercise that Gay Hendricks suggests in the book 5 Wishes was the start of me feeling like not so much that I had run out of time, but that I wanted to make the most of whatever time I had left. And of course, none of us knows what that is. But in the book 5 Wishes, Gay Hendricks encourages you to identify what some of those things are. If you look back on your life, was it a success or was it not? If it was not, why not? And then name those things, but then start to turn it around and name them in a positive way to let yourself know that your life is successful because you are doing these things. I'll share with you some of the notes that I've got. I haven't looked at these, admittedly, in several years. But here are the handwritten notes that I have stuffed in the jacket of 5 Wishes. It says, my life was not a success because I did not have a conscious, loving relationship with a woman who adored me. I didn't have fun in my work. I didn't fully share and express my creative gifts to their full potential. Again, these are thoughts I had back at about 2011. It says, I didn't earn the money to match my potential. I'm reading some of these things and thinking about them at the same time because one of them is not making much sense. One of them says, I guess, I didn't have the money to do all the things that I wished to do and have all that I wished to have. Another says, I wasn't fully present and happy in every moment. I didn't inspire and assist others in creating or finding a greater quality of life for them. And I wish I'd done more of that. I wish I'd enjoyed my work so that I could earn the money to match my potential. It says, I wish I'd been happy and fully present and fulfilled in each moment of life. I wish I'd expressed my creative potential. I wish I had worked to inspire and help others to a greater quality of life. And I wish I had always and in all times lived in integrity. Interesting, because when I look back at that, I'm several years into enjoying an incredible relationship. You'll hear me sometimes refer to my sweetheart, Caroline, who I absolutely adore, and she and I have worked really hard together to create and enjoy the kind of relationship that I kind of alluded to here. I have done more in the last year or so to express my creativity than in the many years and maybe even a decade prior to that. Money, we're still working on that. Being present and happy and fully engaged, I've come so far as that's concerned, and trying to inspire and assist others. Well, that's partly up to you whether you find any value in this or not. Anyway, at the risk of rambling on a little bit more, 5 Wishes by Gay Hendricks. I can't possibly recommend that book enough, and that scenario that I've described, of thinking about yourself at the end of your life and looking back and was it a success or was it not? And that'll give you some clarity really quickly. The third book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. This book was given to me by a great friend and a former colleague of mine, Kim Parker. And she and I were having one of the many discussions that we had back at the time when we used to work together. And she reached behind her desk one time and she pulled out a copy of this book, The 4 Agreements. And she had told me that she'd read it and loved it so much that she actually purchased another copy of it with the intent to be able to pay it forward and give it to somebody else. And I was the benefactor of that. And it's a simple little book. I remember reading about it before. I knew about it already. And I probably had it in my hands in the library. I'm a fan of the Miami Heat basketball team and have been ever since they came into the league. And I remember reading about their coach at the time, Pat Riley, giving a copy of the 4 Agreements to every single player, and that kind of intrigued me. But I didn't pick it up back then. An example of sort of where I started the show. But I read that right away when Kim gave it to me, and just I highlighted everything I thought was important. And there are big passages of this book where the whole page is yellow because of the highlights. The 4 Agreements, they are: number 1, be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take anything personally. You know what other people think and what is not about you. It's about them. The third agreement, don't make assumptions. How many of us are guilty of that in every single day and in most moments? And the fourth agreement, always do your best. Understanding that your best is going to range from day to day. What your best is today might not be the same as tomorrow, except it's still your best or wherever you are at that moment. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you pick up the Four Agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz. It's a Toltec wisdom book, it says, and I just absolutely adore this book. I can't imagine being without it. The Four Agreements. The fourth one that I'll share is called The Magic of Thinking Big by a guy named David J. Schwartz. Now, this one's come up in the podcast before as well, and the reason why is that I first heard about this book from Kevin O'Hara of alcoholmastery.com. Kevin was in episode 11 of the podcast, and what a treat it was to get the chance to talk to him. Now, The Magic of Thinking Big was a book that he mentioned when he did something kind of similar to this in a podcast that he did years ago. Now, I first found out about Kevin when I was really starting to get serious about trying to get alcohol out of my life. I used to have a habit of coming home every night and then reaching for a beer, even though I didn't necessarily want one, and that would usually turn into a few of them, and it bothered me that I had ingrained that habit so deeply. But anyway, we talk about that at more length in that episode number 11, if you want to hear that with Kevin O'Hara. But back around about the time, I think it was near the end of 2013, that I came across Kevin's suggestion of a number of different books. I remember Think and Grow Rich was one of them. I've read that. It's on my bookshelf at noscheduleman.com/books. But one of them was called The Magic of Thinking Big, and I don't know why that one resonated with me, but I went and I looked into it. I remember going to the local bookstore. They still have a couple of those around where I live. And I found it there, and I pulled it off the shelf, and I just started reading. Now, this book, The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz, with due respect, it's a lot of the same information, in my opinion, that has been repackaged and retold in so many other books, including bits and pieces of it that are in some of the volumes that I'm talking about in this very podcast. In other words, I didn't feel like there was anything particularly groundbreaking about it. And again, I say this with respect. This is one of the top 5 books that's influenced me. But it was an example of the right book at the right time. It was what I needed to see and hear exactly when I needed to see and hear it. So at that point, I was a couple of years past the divorce. I'd got myself into a new career path. I was doing okay. I was enjoying a lot more moments of presence and gratitude on a regular basis. I thought that I was happier as a person. Now, professionally in my work, I still had a lot of anxiety and I wasn't completely happy, and I've been working hard to improve that. But yeah, there were still a lot of signs that I was carrying around a lot of stress and that I was not all the way committed to manifesting a lot of the things that I talked about in my list when I mentioned the book, The 5 Wishes, about what I wanted to see happen in my life in order to judge it as a success. I still wasn't fully bought into all of that. So along comes The Magic of Thinking Big, and I got reading it, and I'll be honest with you, I remember thinking, well, I don't know what I have to lose. I'll just do everything it says. And so I literally did that. I used it as kind of a how-to textbook to live and to conduct myself. And so some of the things that almost seem kind of silly, like it says about be a front seater, sit up in meetings and speak up and start conversations with people and look them in the eye and dig into where you are. And if you're not feeling passionate about something, maybe about your work, the way to manifest that feeling inside yourself is to get more involved, to dig right into it. And so I started forcing myself to do these things. And even my kids noticed it. We would be, at the grocery store and my son would say, "Dad, why are you talking to that person?" We'd maybe be in line waiting to check out. And he'd say, "Well, do you know that person?" I'd say, "No." "Well, why are you talking to them?" "Because they're there." But what I was doing was I was thinking about what Schwartz was mentioning in The Magic of Thinking Big, and I thought, I've got to do this. I've got to break out of my shell. Now, the ironic thing I think about me is that as a guy with a background in radio and in writing and performing music and in speaking and MC work, I can do something like this where I in the past had been on the radio, and I may have been talking to tens of thousands of people at any given time, or you can put me on stage to speak or to sing in front of 5 people or 500 people or 5,000 people, and I feel completely at home. I feel like time just slows down. I get completely present. I enjoy it. But up until I read The Magic of Thinking Big, I had this paradigm of that when I was off stage, when I was off mic, when I was sort of, on my own time, I just wanted to be left alone. I'd get really inside my own head, very introverted, have my head down, wouldn't look people in the eye, wouldn't talk to people. I just wanted to be inside my own thoughts. And I didn't realize how much I was cutting myself off from such an incredible experience. So a lot of the places that I was used to frequenting, I'll give you an example. The gym, the fitness center. I've been going to the same one for, I can't remember exactly when I started, but it's been either 10 or 11 years. So, over the course of a decade or more, you're going to start to recognize some faces. And there were all sorts of people that I would see that I'd been seeing for years but had never spoken to. Where you get to a point where you feel like you should know somebody and you recognize each other, but it's been so long that you're too embarrassed to ask their name or to talk to them. So there were all sorts of people like that. So I thought about some of the stuff that it said in The Magic of Thinking Big, and I literally forced myself to just start conversations with these people. And even if I couldn't think of anything as mundane as just talking about the weather, usually I could. If I would see they would have a tattoo on their arm, I would say, do you mind if I ask you about your tattoo? Or maybe somebody would be limping, and I would say to myself, just, say something, be kind of compassionate and strike up a conversation. So I'd say something like, I noticed you've got a little bit of a limp. What's got you hobbled? Or something like that. But I got to be honest with you, I have to force myself to do it. But you know what happened? Is that every single time I would do that, the other person's body language would immediately change. Nobody was ever miserable. And even if they were, as you learn in the 4 agreements, that's about them, not about me. It's a choice how you want to be. But almost every single time where I reach out with something pleasant to another person, guess what happens? I feel good, and they're pleasant in return, and they feel good. Well, a lot of this stuff from The Magic of Thinking Big, it just started working like a snowball. And I started seeing better results at work. I started getting more involved in my creative pursuits. My health started improving. It was incredible. And that's why The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz is one of my top 5 books that made a positive change on my life. Where are we now? Number 4? Let's keep moving along on this thing. Now, I hope I get the pronunciation of this one okay. I'm going to say Tao. The Tao. Tao Te Ching? Is that how you say it? I hope so. I've got the translation by Stephen Mitchell, but I'll just read what's on the back of this book. It says, in 81 brief chapters, Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, or Book of the Way, provides advice that imparts balance and perspective, a serene and generous spirit, and teaches us how to work for the good with the effortless skill that comes from being in accord with the Tao, the basic principle of the universe. Stephen Mitchell's best-selling version has been widely acclaimed as a gift to contemporary culture. I got to be honest with you. I saw this at a bookstore, and it was on the shelf of one of the staff's picks. I think it was Heather's pick. I don't know why I remember that. I don't know who Heather is. But I bought it, and I brought it home and opened it up. There are a bunch of pages that are dog-eared. Here's one. I'll read it. Page 8. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus, it is like the Tao. In dwelling, live close to the ground. In thinking, keep to the simple. In conflict, be fair and generous. In governing, don't try to control. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. When you are content to simply be yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you. I just opened up the book and chose that at random, but reading that one passage almost makes me emotional. I remember the first time that I came across it, and I read something like that, and I just felt kind of shaken to my core because it spoke of so many things that were almost the opposite of the paradigm that I'd been operating under. You know, where it says, for instance, the supreme good is like water. You know, how many of us picture water, honestly, as, you know, a metaphor, an analogy for strength, for goodness, flexibility? But if you think about it, yeah, I could talk for another half hour on the water analogy alone about how it's constantly transforming. You know, it's here on the earth as part of rivers and streams and oceans, and then it rises through steam and up into the atmosphere and changes forms, transforms, and falls back down to the earth out of the sky as rain and nourishes nature and grass, trees, people through the form of water, animals, back into the rivers and streams and oceans, back up again, constantly transforming. Yet, you know, it's always moving, but it isn't afraid to go side to side. It flows. Sometimes it's rushing. Sometimes it's almost sitting still. And as far as strength is concerned, you know, water is strong enough that it can wear away mountains. If you think about that, I never had before I picked up the Tao. And I'm still thinking about that. You know, I probably will be for a long, long time. It says that, you know, the supreme good is content with the low places that people disdain. Think about that for a second. You know, we're always trying to reach and strive and compare and have and do. And this is saying, like, just, you know, being content with what other people are looking down their noses at. It's not to say I don't think to settle necessarily, but certainly to be present and to be grateful. And there are so many wonderful things just in that one passage alone. Don't compare or compete. Just when you're content to simply be yourself, everybody will respect you. You know, even in books like The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles, he talks about creativity versus competition. You know, it seems like our whole world is based on competition now, and that we encourage each other to be like that. And competition is healthy. You know, you want to challenge yourself and you want to reach new heights. But if it gets to the point of where you're running dead over top of other people, or you're forsaking your compassion and you're not paying any attention to your creativity for the sake of competition, you know, you lose a piece of yourself. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. That's one page of Tao Te Ching, the Book of the Way. There are many translations. Mine is the one with Stephen Mitchell. That's number 4 on the list of the book. Is that 4 or is that 5? No, that's 5. I should have prepared this a little better. So there are the 5. Conscious Living by Gay Hendricks. 5 Wishes, also by Gay Hendricks. The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz and Tao Te Ching. Mine's an English translation by a guy named Stephen Mitchell. All of those are on my virtual bookshelf at noscheduleman.com/books. Now, a couple bonuses for you. Oh, and don't forget the honorable mention to 10% Happier by Dan Harris, which started this whole mess. 2 more I want to talk about. Another one is by Gay Hendricks. Now, they're going to have to put me on the payroll for the Hendricks Institute, maybe. But it's just been that impactful for me. So an honorable mention on this list goes to a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and I'll tell you why. It's the first that I read of what he calls a ULP, or an upper limit problem. And essentially what Hendricks is suggesting that an upper limit problem is that we are the ones that subconsciously trip ourselves up and stunt our positive momentum. That we're doing that to ourselves, that we have kind of an invisible subconscious trigger, a ceiling that we hit, that we trigger ourselves that we may not be aware of. And that once we become aware of it and decide consciously to do something about it and choose to allow things to go well more of the time, then that indeed is what can start to happen. Now, this is a pretty trippy concept. And when I first read about it, I thought, no, like, come on. But when you look back at so many of the principles that are in all these other books that I've already discussed and so many others besides, it falls back into taking experience for your own reality and your own experience. Or did I say taking experience? Taking responsibility. Anyway, I'm getting myself mixed up. But so, it's an extension of whatever's going on in your experience may not necessarily be your fault, but it's your responsibility. Think about that. If it's in your awareness, if you're experiencing it, it's your responsibility. Who else is going to choose what to do about it? There's so many of us just live in a constant state of being like a victim or point our finger and blame, but guess how much power you have in a situation when you choose that stance? None. You've given it all away if you want to point the finger at someone or something else, but if you choose to take responsibility and you realize that you are perceiving reality through your specific lens, well, that's something that you have some power over. Now, we could really dive down this rabbit hole, but the upper limit problem, which Hendricks talks about in the book The Big Leap, suggests that, when things are going along well and you suddenly get sick or you get hurt or some other calamity ensues that slows your forward momentum, that you're manifesting that. You're causing it subconsciously. Yeah, I know. I can imagine you right now. That's how I felt when I first read about it. But I thought, kind of like when I read Magic of Thinking Big, well, what do I have to lose by investigating it? And I can share with you my experiences that it has been really illuminating when you realize that every single time I had a problem or a big challenge, I was there. I was part of it. It's the only common denominator to all of the negative issues that I've had in life. Me. I was there. Now, I'm not blaming myself, but taking responsibility. So, for instance, I had a pattern that I recognized. It took years after I read The Big Leap, but I recognized that around about every 4 to 6 weeks, I'd get not sick, but slowed down. I'd get the sniffles or a cough or a flu, or it almost seemed to come like clockwork, and then I would lose all the momentum that I'd had with my fitness efforts at the gym. I'd kind of stall out a little bit in terms of my focus at work and whatever else. And it took a while to be able to latch onto that, and even longer than that to be able to reprogram myself to decide what to do about it. But I had the upper limit problem in mind and thought, how can I smooth this out? How can I allow things to go well? Be honest with yourself. When something's going really well for you, how long is it before you think to yourself, and you can't even help it, it just pops into your mind, things can't possibly keep going like this. Something's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen here. We all do that. But why can't things go well all the time? When you choose that that's how you're going to view it, suddenly other things still happen that you might have viewed as really negative in your previous state of mind, but maybe just doesn't bother you as much when you've chosen a different way. That kind of thing is addressed even more well in each of the books I've mentioned. The Four Agreements was the one that I was thinking of, but the upper limit problem is absolutely fascinating to think about, and that's in The Big Leap. And Hendricks also talks about, aspiring to get into your zone of genius with your work, and I'm still working at that. I'll let you know if and when I ever get there. And then one more bonus book, which is one that I can't say has changed my life yet, but it has blown my mind wide open, and I fully expect that I'm going to be able to come back to you in a month, 6 months, a year, a decade from now and say that this book completely changed the results that I was getting in my life and what I thought at the time I was capable of versus what I have achieved by the time that I get to wherever I'm describing now. And the book is U Squared, or U2, by Price Pritchett. And the book, almost more of a pamphlet than a book. It's only 34 pages long. 36 pages long. And every 2 pages is a chapter. But, it is just loaded with impact. This one challenges you, U Squared, to embrace the idea that you can make a quantum leap in the quality of your life and the results that you're getting. And the only thing stopping you from doing that is you. And the only thing placing those limits upon your thinking is you. It is a fascinating book. I read 2 pages of U Squared by Price Pritchett every single morning, and I've started making notes on what I'm reading because each page really resonates with me and fascinates me. But I'm also trying to write some things down to try to, intertwine it right into my DNA so that I could become a bit of an unconscious component with it. It's a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. You can find that on my bookshelf as well at noscheduleman.com/books. So there you go. 5 books that positively changed my life. 1 honorable mention, the one that started it, and a bonus that I'm hoping will be in the column of having changed my life at some point down the road. But certainly it's right up there now in terms of the material that I go to every day. Which books would you suggest? Which books have had the kind of impact for you that I've just described over the last 40 minutes or so? I would love to know. I know that there are hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of books out there that just provide an incredible resource of information and acquired experience and shared knowledge. And I would love to know what has made a positive impact for you. So the best place to do that is on my website at noscheduleman.com. If you want to keep it in the book theme, go right to noscheduleman.com/books. Or, of course, you can reach me on any of my social channels. I'd also love to have you as a member of the email VIP that you can sign up for at noscheduleman.com as well. I'd love if you'd share and subscribe this podcast on YouTube or SoundCloud. You can leave comments with this episode there, or rate it, subscribe, or review it on iTunes. Just go to any one of them and search Kevin Bolmer or No Schedule Man, and you'll find us there. Thanks again for spending the time with me today. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you're able to take something positive from it. Until next time, remember, no plan is all part of the plan. Sometimes you just gotta let go. I'll see you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.